Good afternoon and welcome to QuickBooks Made Easy. I am Greg Bosson, your fearless leader. Welcome to the year of 2016 also. It's really trippy. But you know what? We're here in January of 2016. And so for this month's quick tip, I thought that I would talk about something that's really good to do at the end of your fiscal year. A lot of people have year ends of December 31. But even if your year end is other than that, you can still learn from this. And that point is, the point that I'm trying to make is, what specifically do we do in terms of closing the books at the end of the year? Now, there's not really a closing of sorts where there's closing journal entries made. There's not a lot of weird, funky things that you have to do in QuickBooks because QuickBooks is pretty easy. But at the end of the year, there is something that you might want to do, and that's called setting a closing date. And we're going to talk about what it is and why you want to do it right now. All right. And this is going to work for you no matter what version of QuickBooks that you use. Okay. So here we go. So I'm going to go ahead and start with saying, you know what? It's the end of the year. So I'm going to pull up a little P&L here. And I'm going to pull one up for, we'll say, last fiscal year. So here we've got a financial statement for last fiscal year. So if your fiscal year ended in December, the year's over, you'd reconcile all of your bank accounts, give everything to your accountant, and then that accountant is supposed to prepare a tax return from that. Point is that you don't want to change anything in your data file after that tax return has been completed. Because if you have, or anything in the time period that tax return covers. Because if you do, then your QuickBooks won't match your tax return anymore. So it's very important that you set a closing date to keep that from happening. So let me get a little bit more specific here. So here's a little P&L. Let's say we've given this to our accountant. They've done the taxes. I'm going to double click on this particular number for health insurance. And here's a check. Okay. Now, in QuickBooks, if you don't set a closing date, which we'll do in a second, what can happen is you can change stuff. Look at this. I'm going to change this to $4,000. You wouldn't want to change something like this after the tax return's done because you're affecting a number that's already been put on a tax return. So that's not a good idea. Also, if this check is cleared the bank, then you're screwing it up that way also. That's another reason. But it'll let you do it. Save and close. Now all of a sudden it's at 4,000 and now this number is a lot bigger and now it doesn't match the tax return. Okay, so how can you prevent people from changing stuff like that? By setting the closing date. Now here's where you go to set the closing date. I'm going to go up to company. And everybody that's listening to me should do this at least at the end of the year. So I'm going to go to company. I'm going to go to set closing date. Okay. Now, this is a preference, and only the company administrator can actually do this. This is the head QuickBooks user, not your administrator for your Windows or for in general. I'm talking about your QuickBooks user administrator. And if you're not the administrator, it'll alert you when you go to try and change this. I am the administrator, so it's letting me do it. Date through which books are closed. See how it's not set? So I'm going to click Set Date Password, and then I'm going to put a date. Now, what date should I put? Well, what you should put is the date at the end of your fiscal year. By the way, you can do this monthly. You can set a closing date every single month if you want to. But I'll say at a minimum, you need to do it at the end of your fiscal year. So I'm going to put 12/31/15. Okay. Now, when do I type this? I can type it. I'm recording in January right now. And I'm putting this prior date and you'd want to do it because you want to make sure your bank recs are done before you set the closing date and send the work to the accountant. So yes, you can set the date in the past. Okay, so I'm in January of 2016. I've reconciled all the bank accounts. I'm going to set the closing date as of December 31, 2015. So you don't have to do it on the date. You just have to do it as of the date. Okay, so I'm going to put that date here, and I'm going to ignore this password right now. So what this means is that anything on or before this date will not be able to be changed. So I'm going to click OK again. So here we go. I'll go back to this transaction, and I'm going to change something on it again. I'll make this 300. When I click Save, because that closing date is set, you will get this warning, okay? QuickBooks lets you do this, but it's not a good idea. This transaction is in a closed period. Changing it could affect your previously filed tax returns. Now, of course, are you sure you want to make the change? You still could say yes, and that's what a lot of people do. They blow it off. They make the change anyway. So that's not necessarily a good idea. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to put an extra security on top of it. So I'm going to go ahead and just escape out of this for now. I'm going to go back up to Company. And I'm going to go over to setting a closing date. And this time, I'm also going to put a password on here. And these passwords are case sensitive. Great. So I put a password on here. Click OK. Now when I go to change this, more than a warning, I actually have to type a closing date password to make the change. So I think that that's what everybody should do. And then only you would know that closing date password. I actually do this for my clients, where I set the password and I don't even tell them what it is. But if I put in the password, then it'll let me change it. Okay, and there's reasons why you might want to change things in a prior year, things that don't matter. I would never change a dollar amount in a prior year, but if I wanted to add a memo, I could certainly do that. It's still going to say, hey, you're changing stuff in a prior period, but because I know I'm not changing anything that's really important, it's okay with me. So I'll just put a memo in here. And then when I go to click Save, this is an example when I would say, you know, it's okay to override. Go ahead and put the password in here and click as change it, because you're not changing really the dollar amount. You're just adding a memo. So that's probably okay. All right. So now the other thing about this is, well, wait a second. Now I can, is this closing date thing here forever? No. Go to Company, set the closing date. If I push this set date and password, I can change the date. And what typically people do is every month they do the reconciliation, they print out the reports for the owners or the board members or whoever, and then they change the closing date. They move it up 1 month and they change it once a month, like that. So now I've changed the date to January of 2016. Okay. Also, you can undo the closing date altogether if you want to. You can just remove it. So you have that kind of flexibility. But again, only the administrator can do that. So I think that's it for setting the closing date. Very important thing to understand, and we should all be doing it. Thank you very much. That was your quick tip for January 2016. And at the end of this, I think there's a little link where you can get these videos sent to you once a month if you want to keep hearing from me, which, of course, why wouldn't you? Take care.